probably peeling yourselves away from your computers, playing with new character models to come here. So, two general themes here. I want to talk about kind of where we've come from in the past 10 years, how things have gone, some lessons we've learned along the way, and how that's going to build a foundation for us to have another 10 years. So, I don't know what our 20th anniversary celebration will be. Could be, you know, a retrospective on the nostalgia rate of Siege of Orgrimmar, since nobody's going to really be planning to do it 10 years from now, but I know there's going to be one. So, it's crazy, right? I mean, a whole generation has grown up with our game at this point. I have a guildmate who has a son that was born about a year after the game launched, and he now proudly has his son doing herbalism and mining for him while he's at work. A little bit of child labor, but it's heartwarming to see, to see that being passed down. And we've, of course, grown up with them too. You know, we're all at different places in our lives, those of us who played the game that long, than we were when we first picked it up. People who were originally students now have families of their own. People who, you know, have tons of free time now have careers, and maybe you're going from reading for 5 hours in a night and, you know, staying up a lot of caffeine to trying to squeeze in 90 minutes between the time the kids go to bed and the time you have to go to bed. And, you know, along the way, our game's grown and changed. Certainly there were missteps, certainly there were mistakes, but I think from those mistakes, we've learned lessons, and hopefully come out of those experiences a little bit stronger, with a little bit better footing as we look towards the future. And that's really our goal. You know, we're not going to be perfect, we're not going to get it right every time, but we want to make sure that as we go forward, we're building upon that foundation. So, yeah, original 2004 World of Warcraft, Ragnarok the Fire Lord, coming soon again to you in a few weeks in 40-player LFR multicore. Should be interesting times. This was the original boss of the game, right? But you didn't see him in that cinematic anywhere, because really, classic World of Warcraft wasn't about a specific story. It wasn't about a specific villain or an end game or a destination or goal. It was about just jump into this world of swords and sorcery and magic, live the characters that you played with in the real-time strategy games, and go out and adventure. This just happened to be the most powerful boss that had the highest item level loot in the initial shipping game, but he wasn't really the end boss in a sense. So, yeah, looking back, you know, back then, everything was so new. We were all clueless. You know, I've been playing since day one, 2004. Remember, you know, looking around at all the casters stacking intellect wherever they could get a hold of it, because it gave them larger mana pools, and it felt like, oh, that's like a thing I should have as a caster. It's totally what I need as a mage. But I have more mana. No, actually, you want spell power, but no one do that. People, you know, kind of stumbled upon things that seemed powerful, but no one really knew. There were tons of mistakes. You know, it was an amazing game at its time, but there were glaring flaws all over the place. I mean, if you were probably easily half of the specs out there weren't viable or didn't have reasonable talents. You know, if you were someone who wanted to be a hardcore survival hunter, you're like, I love survival, but all my points into this talent tree, you had a 31-point talent called Lacerate. It was a melee attack to look forward to at the end of the road. Not really the greatest thing. And so, yeah, we were all just kind of stumbling around in the dark, trying to figure it out as we went, but it was all new, and it was all crazy, and it was all magical. At the same time, the majority of players, all through that time, were not max level. They were still leveling up. You know, the goal, getting level 60, was a dream for many people. It took hundreds of hours, and it was something that, you know, fraught with peril at every turn. And what that meant was also that the so-called endgame was quite exclusive, but it could afford to be exclusive. You know, it was okay to have a rating game that really a small fraction of players were going to get to experience, and that was targeted at getting 40 players together for scheduled periods of time, for hours on end, because trash was going to respawn behind you as fast as you could clear it, and you weren't going to commit a lot of time, there's no point. Because most people were still just trying to get to level 50 to level 60 so that they could maybe run Blackrock Nest or Stratholme or Skulllands, and that was their goal. You know, the idea of going to raid was just kind of just a glimmer in our eyes. But of course, you know, that changed. The game moved on. The Burning Crusade, we did have a clear villain. We had, you know, Illidan, of course, in the trailer saying you are not prepared, letting everyone know. And the reality is actually most people weren't prepared. Hardly anyone ever actually got to fight Illidan. You needed 24 friends if you wanted to fight him, if you wanted to see the conclusion to that storyline. And that was just the nature of the game. You know, looking ahead, Arthas, the Lich King, Wrath. A few more people got to see this guy. Still not, you know, not anywhere near massive numbers. But, you know, with the advent of, you know, switching to 10 and 25 player, having an Ice Crown scaling buff over the course of that raid's lifespan, more people got to see it. Deathwing. Now, with Raidfinder, millions of people killed Deathwing, but that was also a different mode in a sense. For guilds, for organized groups, still very few people actually got to finish this content and see it. Garrosh. Garrosh is probably having a pretty rough month. Garrosh has probably been killed like 100 times since I got up here and started talking because it turns out people really want heirlooms. So, the way in which we relate to the content, the way in which the villains manifest themselves, and sort of the pace and structure of the game has changed tremendously over the years. So, I just want to kind of look back in broad strokes at some of the things that we've learned, what worked well for us, what didn't work so well for us from 2004 to today. I think in general, and this isn't an ironclad rule, but for the most part, where we expanded the breadth of the game, where we introduced new modes of gameplay, gave you new ways of interacting with this world, we did right by our players, and we have not regretted those decisions. Now, in some cases, there were missteps that came out of these, but I'll get to that in a minute. So, for example, introducing Arena in Burning Crusade. Prior to Burning Crusade, this sort of the only one-on-one, really small type PvP you had was dueling in front of what was then Ironforge and Orgrimmar. Maybe occasionally you could get some people or some guildmates to strangle for an arena for a little bit of free-for-all to try to figure out who was actually the best. There was no clear way of knowing that, and we created this entirely new mode of gameplay, this entirely new playstyle. It's certainly not for everyone. It wasn't meant to be for everyone, but for hundreds of thousands of people, if not millions, it became something that became a really active, almost primary pastime, and something that led them to meet new friends and have something to do every time they logged in that was never ceased to be entertaining. PvE matchmaking in general, I think, both Raid Finder, Dungeon Finder, it opened up large portions of our game to people who otherwise couldn't have realistically experienced them. If you think back, Dungeon Finder seems like it's been around forever at this point, but prior to that, if you wanted to do a dungeon, you were kind of at the mercy of the whims of trade chat to some extent. You could log on and try to form a group, spam occasionally, send tell people in your friend list, a couple of guildmates that might be online. It might take you 30 minutes to find a tank, if not longer. Then you had to hope that everyone stuck around. There was no such thing as, I'm just going to hop on and do a quick dungeon during my lunch break, or I've got an hour to kill, let me go play something wild and see if I can get some items. That just wasn't a thing you could do. And as I mentioned earlier, as our player base has grown, as our players have grown and moved on in life, it becomes increasingly important for us to do. Daily quests. Kind of a dirty word in Mr. Pandaren, right? We overdid this a little bit. But if you think back, daily quests actually were Burning Crusade innovation. Quests used to be something that you didn't do at max level. Quests were, you level up, that's how you gain experience, that's how you get levels. Then once you hit the end game, well, yeah, you're done with quests. You only have dungeons to do, and there isn't anything in the outdoor world that's actually something that you can engage with on a regular basis. The idea that there's sort of evergreen content waiting for you, somewhat randomized, and something that you can actually do in the outdoor world to further your character was an entirely new mode of gameplay that was introduced. The way it clearly can be abused, clearly can be overdone, but as a core innovation, I think added a lot. Holidays, right? Light, fun, we've added these over the years, we continue to update them. Just have some new updates to Howl's End that are live on the servers right now. We're going to continue updating them in the future. Something to do, just, oh sweet, it's, this month, the Horseman's coming around, or Love is in the Air, or, Midsummer, or what have you. A way of doing something in your off nights when you're not raiding, when you don't have any way of specifically looking to progress your character, you can go do some fun stuff, collect cosmetic rewards and experience the game in a totally different way that is, limited time thing that makes you feel good for having logged in during that period of time. Then very broadly, achievements and collection gameplay. We added around the Lich King, and then have built upon with the whole pet system, a mount journal, toy box most recently, a way again during your downtime of scratching that itch. If you have a little bit of that, gamer OCD, you're kind of a completionist, you like filling in boxes, you like filling in the bars, of going off and taking on challenges that otherwise you might not have had reason to, but still feels like very satisfying gameplay. What didn't work so well? Whenever we created content or shifted our reward structure to suit one portion of the player base at the expense of someone else, right? Rather than just expanding your options, when we said, oh, we're going to kind of focus this stuff towards that guy over there at the expense of this guy over here. And this is something we've sort of been criticized about to some extent, and You know, there's this pendulum that we always have with our tuning, whether it's class balance, whether it's encounter tuning, just kind of swings back and forth. And yeah, so let me use encounter tuning as an example, something kind of near and dear to my heart. And I think it's an area where we've had a lot of missteps over the years. So obviously I talked about how classic raiding was. Burning Crusade, no mystery, even if you weren't around at the time, ask anyone who was. Burning Crusade dungeons were hard, Burning Crusade heroics were brutal. You know, there were mobs that would one-shot you if you didn't have crowd control, if you didn't have the perfect route. God forbid you had a couple of melee, it was not a good time. Raiding similarly, you know, if you wanted to check out this new 25-player raid size that we had coming out of Classic WoW, you ran into this brick wall called Rule and Mag Theridon right away that were tuned to kind of pick up where Classic Extramus had left off. I mean, they got nerfed later on down the line, but raiding remained an extremely exclusive activity all the way up through Sunwolf, the very end of the expansion. Now that pendulum swung all the way back to the start of Wrath of the Lich King. Right? Extramus, millions of people suddenly were able to jump in and clear the hardest content in the game in patch 3.0. You know, everyone was walking around with Kel'Thuzad's weapons, his gear. They beat the final boss. Holy crap! You know, people who previously, for whom raiding was off limits, suddenly could jump in and do this. And of course, that brought feedback. You know, a lot of people complained about this and said that we're devaluing accomplishments. That, you know, when something becomes so easy, it loses some amount of meaning, and you know, that makes the game less rich, less deep as a result. So what followed Wrath? What followed Extramus? Ulduar, clearly, again, a favorite raid of many people. We hear wonderful things about it. For many people who were raiding successfully in Extramus, Ulduar represented a brick wall. They went from being able to fully clear and farm all the bosses in Extramus to running headfirst into, you know, XT or Thorum or Mimiron, and the raiding stopped there. And that was not the greatest experience. Suddenly, all these people for whom hopes had been kindled, the door had been opened, had the door slammed shut in their face. And so, of course, when we went back and we had Arch of the Crusade, you know, Trial of the Crusader right after that, much easier, much more accessible. And again, at the end of Wrath, we were hearing this murmuring, and we started to give it a lot of thought, a lot of consideration. You know, have we made the game too easy? Have, you know, by taking away some of this challenge, have we diminished accomplishment? Have we diminished the sense of goals to pursue? And so Cataclysm. Heroic dungeons, super hard right out the gate. Tier 11 rating, super hard right out the gate. First, again, for many people, for the core audience for that content, some of their favorite times, some of their favorite memories. You hear people talk about, you know, Tier 11 heroic progression during the first months, and there were a lot of great guilds that worked together and overcame those challenges. But for a lot of others, again, the door slammed in their face. Mist, actually, you know, it was a little bit in the middle there, but overall, the initial raids were quite challenging. A lot of guilds ran into brick walls on fights like Garalon, fights like Elegon, fights like Coridon, and Throne of Thunder. We had Wraithfinder on the side, and that was a little bit of a mistake on our part. We initially assumed that because Wraithfinder was there and Wraithfinder was pretty easy, that okay, well, we can make the rest of it hard and everyone's getting taken care of. The reality is there's this group in the middle that wasn't being very well served, but this pendulum swinging back and forth. So going into Warlords, stop. We've been doing this too much, right? There has to be a better way than constantly vacillating through easy and hard and trying to please one audience while pissing off another, then pleasing that audience and pissing off the first. What else can we do? Well, instead of, you know, swinging this pendulum back and forth, what if we just stop it? What if we focus on building a wider pendulum? What if we can have, you know, the stationary static pendulum that just covers the whole arc so everyone can be happy, everyone can have something that is for them? And I think that vision, that symbol represents our philosophy as we approach designing the game now and designing it going forward. There are millions and millions of people who've played World of Warcraft, right? This is well known. I think 7.4 million as a last count. So we hear a lot about what the player base wants, whether it's, you know, why are you listening to the player base's feedback? Why are you ignoring the hunter community? Don't you know every shaman wants you to do this thing? But actually, when you actually break it down, the community, the shaman community, whoever else, consists of thousands, if not more, voices that are often dissonant and often asking for directly contradictory things. You know, you ask it, I've seen threads on Untitled Chapter, like, if you were dictator of World of Warcraft for a day, what would you do? And someone's like, oh, I would remove PvP from the game entirely. And it's also like, I would remove raids from the game entirely. It's like, well, how do you please those two people? And which one of those should we do? And the answer is neither. But we've come to realize, you know, we have to apply our understanding of how our player base functions and how can we make a game that's going to offer something for everybody who wants to play it without it coming at the expense of other people. And I think we really hit upon and tried to focus on accessibility as a new ideal. Now, accessibility is not dumbing down, it's not oversimplifying. It's actually just making it more accessible. It's actually making it easier for someone to be introduced to something. Whether it's a class, you know, being able to learn and understand the basics of the rotation, what buttons you should use, whether it's a rating counter, being able to sort of understand what the boss is doing, how you should counter those things. There's still tremendous room for tactical and strategic depth and complexity, and actually applying those things that you've learned and understood in ways that are going to, you know, challenge you and give you a very fulfilling sense of reward. This is, you know, a core Blizzard design value. It's been one of our design values since the very beginning. Right? We want to make games, we want to make systems that are easy to learn, difficult to master. Actually, Rob Pardo in a talk at, I think, the GDC recently, a couple of years ago, kind of clarified and refined this to say really more almost like impossible to master. And that's sort of our goal, and we think in some ways at the high end, we're in a pretty good place there. If you look at, you know, sort of the most competitive systems in World of Warcraft, like raiding or PvP, there is tremendous room to excel and to improve and to continually refine your performance. Even the gap between, you know, the 5th best guild in the world and the 1st or 2nd best guild in the world is massive. And even the top guilds, they make mistakes. There are always things that you could do better. The top arena teams in the world that are competing in professional tournaments, you know, they make mistakes on a regular basis. And there's this tremendously high skill cap people can approach but never quite reach. And so ultimately, that's where we're positioned right now. As we look forward to the next 10 years, as we look forward to Warlords, we are trying to sort of take on this impossible challenge of being all things to all people. We want to offer something to all types of players, regardless of what the play style is, regardless of what you're looking for, but to do so in an inclusive way that is accessible and approachable to everybody. So let's look at different places where we've applied some of these lessons, as we looked at Warlords in particular. I'm not going to belabor this, and I've talked about it a lot. You know, you've probably seen this chart at BlizzCon slides, elsewhere online. Overall, the raid structure that we're going into in Warlords, I think, is a good solution and a stable state for what a raid game can look like going forward. We have 3 discrete difficulties, normal, heroic, and mythic, to cater to organized raiding groups. And we have raid finders separately for people who can't commit a solid block of time or don't want to deal with organizing a large group of people to do this content. With 3 different difficulties, we can cater to everybody from friends and family guilds, to more organized guilds, to the super high-end hardcore guilds, and they can have an appropriate challenge, but everyone can still see the content, everyone can still finish the storyline if that's what they're looking to get out of the game. And be appropriately challenged, appropriately rewarded. Class design. Here I think this is one area where, you know, we've obviously focused a lot, and people have seen these changes in patch 6.02 on live. Ability pruning. I think in many ways pruning is actually the right word for this, even though it kind of came about as coincidental. You know, pruning is what you do to a bush or a plant or whatever when you actually want to control its growth and enable it to grow in better, more aesthetically pleasing, more you know, vitality-inducing ways. And overall, we took a look at our classes that in many cases have accumulated, you know, 10 years of craft. Classes started out decently once we fixed some of the initial issues. By the end of Classic WoW, reasonably well-rounded with solid toolkits, strengths and weaknesses, and clear identities. And then we added new abilities every expansion. Double cap goes to 70, everyone gets 5 new buttons. Goes to 80, everyone gets 4 new buttons. 85, 3 new buttons. And you get some more active talents along the way as those get unlocked. And before you know it, someone trying to pick up a new class, or even, you know, returning to something that might have a new spec, looks at a spellbook that has 57 abilities in it. And you have to somehow figure out which ones you're supposed to use, in what order, what your priorities are supposed to be. And that's a daunting initial threshold challenge. That's not what we want our game to be about. We don't want that to be so inscrutable that you can't even figure out where to begin. We want that to be intuitive, easier to understand, and then you can actually have depth when it comes to applying it. So what's the goal of our design when it comes to classes in particular? Let's say you're a Feral Druid. This is what the Feral Druid rotation theoretically looked like in 5.4. Some of you may have seen a different version of this that has John Madden somewhere in the middle. Yeah, I didn't put that one up here, but you might know what I'm talking about. That's potentially an interesting game. That's potentially fun. Certainly, if you're just doing it on target dummy or you're fighting patchwork, and you have this complicated priority hierarchy of 5 different things you need to keep track of. You know, needs to come before B and C, except when D is active, in which case B takes priority, et cetera, et cetera. Doing that is incredibly challenging. You know, it's almost like a little sort of rhythm game. It's like we built, you know, DDR or something into World of Warcraft. But if that's what you're doing, that could be reasonably engaging. But that's actually not how our game plays. That's not what we ask of you. We don't ask you to sit there and fight something that's static and doesn't fight back for 5 minutes. We ask you to do that rotation while fighting an arena team of 3 people just trying to kill you and your healer, or while fighting a raid boss that's dropping fire on you that you have to move out of, and spawning an ad over there that you need to run over and interrupt before it gets cast off, and then your raid leader just asks you to battle res someone else who stood in the fire elsewhere. And you also need to do all of that. Exactly. Sometimes that happens though. Sometimes the boss is untauntable, you never know. And yeah, so and I think we can still have tremendous amounts of depth without designing a game where we're pretending like there aren't already all these multitasking situations, multitasking threats out there. And so our goal in the pruning, our goal in taking a fresh approach to our classes has been twofold. It's been to make it easier to get a handle on what you're supposed to be doing, so it's not this massive puzzle that you need to consult a guide to even understand, while recognizing that really what makes the best warrior, or the best druid, or the best healer isn't, you know, your ability to mechanically perform your rotation, it's your ability to do so while multitasking, while adapting to handle all the dynamic threats in the content that you're doing. That is what is fun, that is what is challenging. Wow, there's tremendous depth there, there's a tremendous skill cap there. The other thing that Ability Pruning does is it lets us have room to give you cool new toys in the future, which is something that we realized every time we actually had a legitimate need we wanted to meet, we would look at your buttons, we'd look at your action bars and realize like, okay, people don't have any free keybinds. We want to give you something, but it's almost a nuisance. So, items. So a couple of changes here. You know, we've gotten rid of stats like hit and expertise. We've gotten rid of reforging. Going back to the ideal of, you know, easy to learn, hard to master, or impossible to master, this was the opposite. This was hard to learn, easy to master, which was pretty much the worst possible combination. Solving, you know, optimizing your hit and expertise, optimizing your reforging to hit certain breakpoints. That wasn't something that was at all intuitive. The data that you needed to solve that problem wasn't readily apparent, and it wasn't a problem that you really could reasonably solve without the assistance of third-party tools. If you had those tools, it was trivial. Right? So most people just went to a website or used an add-on that figured out what they had to do with reforging to hit the certain caps, and that was that. If you weren't doing those things, of course, you were handicapped. And that's really, there isn't a whole lot of good to that. Hit and expertise in particular also had this bizarre status as like penalty stats. They were anti-fun. You needed to get enough hit in order to have fun, but then if you got more hit than that, you were having less fun. And that should be, right? Our ideal vision of a stat is something like haste, where as you get more of it, you can feel your bar casting faster, you feel your energy refilling faster, you have a visceral sense and a feedback of the fact that you're growing stronger. We've tried to, you know, replace these systems and reorient them in ways that do add additional depth while keeping the fun, keeping the flavor. So for example, the good part of reforming that we liked was the ability to play with your stats and to actually try to shift your build from one stat direction to another, to be, you know, a prop paladin who wants to try out a mastery heavy build or a haste heavy build without having to get a whole new set of gear. You could reforge all your stats over. We instead decided that really isn't something that warrants an entirely separate system with an NPC in town and its own UI. We can just use traditional tools like gems, enchants, our professions to accomplish that goal. Whereas, you know, before enchanting was something that often had no choice at all. There might only be a single enchant that had any stats that were useful to you at all in a given slot. Now, constantly with the power of those enchants in 2 slots, you can focus whether you want certain stats or others, you can really feel the difference. Similarly, in terms of overall complexity and depth, we've tried to really focus on making much more powerful transformative set bonuses that are waiting for you in Blackrock Foundry from Tier 17 year. These are things that will immediately transform your gameplay when you get them. They also often add additional challenges and things to manage for people who are more likely and have sort of proven themselves ready for that to some extent. You're not being given it right away, but once you've done some organized rating, once you've gotten your Tier 17 set, there's an additional layer of complexity there that makes the items feel really meaningful and transformative while adding depth. And then lastly, garrisons. I think garrisons really reflect what we had talked about earlier in the sense of just broadening the game, of adding new modes of gameplay, new types of gameplay. I think there's nothing quite like garrisons in World of Warcraft prior to this. You get a little bit of it maybe from the player farm in Valley of the Four Winds, but really this is that just writ large 100 times. Garrisons also offer this idea of offline progression, where you can meaningfully advance your character with a smaller time investment by sending your followers out on missions, or going to a building, queuing up a number of work orders, and you have things waiting for you when you log in next time. And I think it also really reflects a lot of the fantasy that we see as driving this feature. It lets you own a piece of the world, you can build it, you can customize it. If you want to be the mount collector, you can build the stables that will let you go out and unlock a series of side quests where you can tame various beasts in Draenor, raise them up, train them, and get them as your own mounts. Each building has its own chunk of content associated with it, and in many ways your garrison represents sort of a gateway into the world at large. The system itself is very approachable, very simple at first glance. I mean, as people who've played it all in the beta have seen, we can kind of walk you through a relatively straightforward tutorial. We show you, okay, this is how followers work. You have a follower, send your follower a mission, place your building in this plot, and there isn't really a whole lot that's confusing or difficult to understand once you actually get your hands on it. But once you dig deeper, it's a tremendous amount of depth in terms of optimizing how you're using your followers, what you're doing with them, what buildings you're using, and all the aforementioned side content that I mentioned, where each building that you invest your time and resources in is unlocking tons of content for you out in the world. So those are just a few examples of how I think that we sort of look back at some things that went well, some things didn't go so well for us in the first 10 years, and are hoping to kick off the next 10 years on the right foot. So. I just want to invite Peter up here, and we're going to sit down and chat a little bit about some more kind of behind-the-scenes stuff.
Thanks, Ian. If you don't know who I am, I'm PJ Russell, so Community Esports Manager for Australia and New Zealand. You might know me as Cagneon on the forums, or I look after the Blizzard ANZ Twitter. Anyone follow that? Yeah. Thanks. So we're just going to sit down with Ian and go behind the scenes a little bit, just look about the development process and see where we go from there. So Ian, you started just prior to Wrath of the Lich King. What made you move from lore to Blizzard?
What? That's not what you do. Yeah, so I was a lawyer for a few years, and I figured I'd go make games.
It's a natural progression.
Yeah, that's the thing that happens. No, so yeah, obviously, so I worked as a lawyer for 4.5 years, right alongside playing WoW as like my primary hobby. Passionate, hardcore WoW player, lawyer by day, WoW fanatic by night. And in the course of doing that, the way through the magic of the internet and the social bonds that you have through World of Warcraft, met a lot of amazing people in my guild and others, got to know some people who eventually ended up working with Blizzard years on down the line. And then just through talking to them, this crazy opportunity came up where someone encouraged me one day to think about applying for a position. I initially dismissed the idea because that sounded crazy. I'm a lawyer. What am I know about video games? Why am I going to go make video games? That's nuts. But thinking about it some more, and then as I was poked a couple more times, I decided, okay, I need to at least find out more about this. And then when it came down to it, I was fortunate enough to get this amazing opportunity. And when I had to make a decision, I knew that if I didn't at least investigate this opportunity and give it a shot, I would find myself regretting it down the line, because it was a once-in-a-lifetime thing. And told myself I'd give it 1 year. It wasn't for me, I'd go back to the law. And that was over 6 years ago, so it's worked out.
What did your parents think?
My parents thought I was completely insane.
One of the questions I had was, have you ever found it's actually an advantage to have a legal background while designing games?
Interesting. I don't know about a legal background in particular, but I think there are a lot of things that drew me and attracted me to the practice of law, and studying law, but also what I like about game design. A lot of it is about problem solving. It's about sort of being analytical, taking building blocks, taking puzzle pieces, and assembling them into a certain shape in support of an argument or a case you're trying to build or what have you. And in many ways, game design is similarly about solving problems given certain constraints, trying to achieve certain goals. And honestly, in legal practice, very often those moments of sort of cool puzzle solving were mired and broken up by large stretches of drudgery and paper pushing, whereas I find game design a much more pure application of those skills.
So you started as a game designer, sort of entry. Tell us about your first sort of memorable content that you worked on.
Yeah, so I started right in the sort of the height of crunch leading up to the release of Graphical Lich King. Some of the initial work I did just as I was learning how the spawning tools worked and all of that was working at outdoor spawning in areas like Icecrown in Northrend, just a lot of support for the questing there. And then moved on to dabble in some raid encounter design, did some work in Overwar, and then going on past that, trying to, I think I probably ended up working on a raid boss or two in each patch thereafter. Also moved over into some class design on the side at the same time.
All right, so tell us about a typical day in the life of Ian.
These days, honestly, it's a whole lot of meetings. But they're actually good meetings, they're fun meetings, most of them. There's a couple of like scheduling meetings that are just going over production schedules that are important, they need to happen. They're not the most fun hour of my day. But actually last week, spent a good chunk of the week in a series of meetings with my team, planning out, and this is one of the most fun parts of the job, planning out a lot of the raid bosses and the encounters that are going to come in the next raid zone in a to-be-announced patch after 6.0. And that's just a matter of, an hour focused on one or two bosses at a time, sitting around a table with a brilliant group of people, a very creative group of people, throwing around ideas, bouncing ideas off each other, trying to refine them into something that we all feel will really come together as a framework for a boss counter. And that's an amazing way to spend an hour.
So speaking of ideas, tell us about something that you thought was brilliant but just didn't quite get past the line or even get to an expansion.
I don't know about brilliant, but I think there's always some ideas that we have in the back burner that we want to try to revisit or make happen when we get a chance. It's something we've talked about a couple times now. We know that one of the greatest treasures that we have in World of Warcraft is this broad array of content. All these dungeons that we have from Ragefire Chasm all the way through the present day. Wouldn't it be great if there was a way to go back and revisit those in some relevant way? We have all this new scaling tech. It was implemented briefly in some form, not really ready for prime time yet, and I've got data lines, and I had the word time walking attached to it. It's something we still want to make happen. There's some technical hurdles to overcome, and some design hurdles just in terms of figuring out the right reward structure for it to make it relevant, but it's something that we really still want to do. 6.0 wasn't necessarily the right time for it, because we have all this new dungeon content that, we kind of want people's attention focused on. We want you running, Bloodmoss slag mines and Shadow and Burial Ground is not hold on. But in future, it's something we really want to make happen.
So how does a raid or a dungeon start out? Like, is it firstly on the expansion theme, or is it a really good idea and then you try to mold it to that?
Yeah, I think definitely the expansion theme, and I think the raids certainly are, the places where we have the capstones for our big story arcs, where you're going to take down the final boss of a given faction. So, looking at Draenor, for example, you have the first raid is Heimal, which is the capital of the Draenor ogres, the height in their empire. You're taking on their emperor and really sort of toppling that force. On the other hand, you have the Blackrock Foundry, which is the sort of part of the war-making power of the Iron Horde, led by Warchief Blackhand. And so the big villains kind of drive the raid as a whole, and then the rest of the zone evolves somewhat organically in terms of thinking about, well, who would the supporting cast for these people be, right? What does the city look like? There's a little bit of kind of Roman influence behind how we envision the Ogre Empire, for example. So they have this Colosseum, they have a market district, they have their temples, and we just imagine different bosses that occupy those areas. Dungeons work very similarly, though I think with dungeons there's a bit more flexibility, where sometimes we'll make something happen and then have the story justify it later just because we think it's a cool idea. The best example there is a dungeon that takes place on a moving train. We really just wanted to have a dungeon on a train. And we're like, well, where does the train go? We'll come up with something. I guess there's a super weapon, like, you have to stop it, otherwise it's going to destroy Shadrath. But really, it's a dungeon on a train. That's kind of the point.
Thanks, Ian. So the other day we were mentioning something about strike teams, and maybe let everyone know what a strike team is and what its function is.
Sure, I think so. Strike teams are a very time-honored core part of how we do development at Blizzard, and the gist there is for every project of a reasonable size, whether it's a game or whether it's even something like a Battle.net launcher, we'll have a team comprised of developers who are not on that particular project, who are sort of given weekly homework assignments to go play chunks of the game, or chunks of, or use the content, whatever it may be, meet and deliver feedback. And that feedback is designed to be really no holds barred, pretty brutally honest, critical feedback that we need to hear internally. This is happening usually well before the content is being shown off to the public in any form. This is really pre-alpha. But the reality is when you're very close to a project, when you've been working on it for a long time, you lose a certain sense of perspective, and you risk, you get lost in the weeds. And so having trusted people come in and kind of give you that outside perspective that you need early enough while you can still make drastic changes is tremendously important, and it's just a core part of how we work at Blizzard.
What advice would you give someone just starting out and wanting to become a game designer?
Well, step one, go to law school. So I think step one, play a lot of games and think critically about the games as you play them. I think something I probably ask everyone that I interview is, and ignore this and forget this in case some of you ever somehow end up interviewing at Blizzard, pretend I never told you this. I ask them, so what are you playing recently, right? What are some of your favorite games? Innocuous question, it's totally a trap. There's a right answer, not really. But the next question is, well, what do you like about the game? Right? What makes it your favorite game? What do you enjoy about it? The next question is, what don't you like about it? What bugged you about it? And the final question is, well, okay, what would you fix? How could you improve that? How could you make the game not have that thing that annoys the hell out of you? And a great telling sign there, and sort of the wrong response, and getting off on the wrong foot on this question, is when it's apparent the person has never before considered that question before I asked them that very moment. They never actually thought for a second, like, oh, well, yeah, it bugged me, but I never thought about how I could fix it, perhaps. I think that really approaching games from the perspective of design really is about problem solving. It's about looking at the game you're playing critically, thinking about what doesn't work and how you could change it to improve that in your eyes. Then looking at your own idea critically, right, and trying to figure out, well, okay, what am I missing, right? Maybe these guys are smart. Surely they would have thought of this. Would this work? Sometimes the answer is you feel pretty solidly convinced that, yeah, that would make it better. But I think that's a big part of thinking like a designer. I think it's always taking a critical eye, and that skill set you can apply to anything. Any game that you end up working on, that will serve you well.
Let's talk raids. What's your favorite raid encounter?
Of all time? Or
of all time.
All time.
Elevator boss!
This is okay, but this is probably a definitely popular one. I'm probably going to go with Lei Shen from Dota Thunder. I think I really love the way that fight came together in terms of its overall elegance. Kind of like what I was talking about earlier with sort of accessibility and depth. There's a handful of mechanics. You can see all the mechanics in the fight almost right away. You bring it to a quadrant, there's one clear mechanic associated with that quadrant. There isn't much confusion about how does this work, I have to learn 15 different abilities. But the actual way your strategy and the tactics unfold from there in terms of managing the resources, moving him around the room to avoid the various failure conditions, and dealing with the abilities as they evolve and grow more powerful, has a ton of depth. And then at the same time, also really knocks out of the park just in terms of the fantasy and immersion. And integrated in the environment, the boss goes to the center of the room, he charges up the whole platform, the walls of the room open up and turn into giant wind tunnels, and I think it really provided a capstone for that raid as a whole.
So obviously most of your job nowadays is regarding raids and dungeons. How do you even judge if a raid encounter, for instance, is a success?
So I think there's a few areas there. I think first off, some of that is just on the tuning. Some of that is how well it served its target audience, and you really have to break it down difficulty by difficulty at that point. Because certainly the target audience for, mythic version of the encounter is different from the target audience for the normal version of the encounter. But if something proved overly challenging for the target audience and it frustrated them, that's a misstep on our part. Or if the target audience just killed it without even stopping for a moment, that probably didn't feel particularly satisfying. There wasn't much of a sense of accomplishment there. We probably wasted an opportunity. The second area is just how easy it was to understand. Eventually we know, the players is very sophisticated. There's a million videos out there are tons of guides out there, there's various boss mobs. All those things will help you eventually figure out what you need to do to beat an encounter. But if it's not intuitive, if you needed to go to those sites to actually understand how the fight works, or how some mechanic works, you need someone to explain it to you, then we didn't do our job correctly, and we didn't make it as approachable and intuitive as it could have been. And then finally, I think it's just about the overall feeling, kind of like what I mentioned with Lei Shen, just that sense of immersiveness, just did it feel cool, right? Did the visuals come together? Did the setting come together to kind of like deliver on this fantasy that you were setting up in the raid as a whole?
I'll wrap it up with this one. Other than WoW, what's your favorite game?
Let's see. I'm going to be a controversial one. I'm actually going to say Dark Souls. I'm going to say Dark Souls 1, not 2. I think it's incredibly. It's a really challenging game. It has a reputation for being really challenging, but it's also really fair. It's about teaching you lessons. I think it has some of the best level design of any game that I've seen or played in terms of how the 3D world interconnects. And it does a great job of also storytelling without a lot of words, just by creating this world and moving the gaps for you to piece together, but you come away with a sense of a really cool place.
Awesome. Really appreciate it, Ian. Guys, Ian, this is our first World of Warcraft developer ever in Australia. Come on, guys.
Thanks, PJ. Thanks, Ian. I'll just grab the clicker from here. Okay. So, that was really cool. Did you guys enjoy that?
Yeah.
It's, this is something, we've done a number of events actually. We did an amazing event up in Brisbane for Wings of Liberty. We did a great event for Heart of the Swarm down in Melbourne. We actually had 3,000 people in Federation Square. There you go. Good StarCraft fans in the house. And so it's really exciting to be able to kind of bring a little bit of the magic of BlizzCon to Australia. This is always kind of the way we view trying to put these events together. Now, we're getting ramped up for the Q&A. So, that was all about the casual kind of chin wag. And now we're going to get into the meaty stuff with you guys. But before we do that, I got to do a little bit of housekeeping. That's why I've got this lead up to launch. I know it's boring, but it's actually kind of important. October 28th, next Tuesday, we've got maintenance. Everybody here is used to maintenance. It's tough, but it's how we make the game function. So next Tuesday, we've actually got extended maintenance, so it's even worse.
Make an Australian service!
So we're very sorry for everyone in the room, and we're actually really sorry for everyone in Australia and New Zealand, because you guys are the only people in the world getting hit with extended maintenance. Because we've got a lot of work to do. Australian servers are coming online next week. Serenity now. Serenity now. It's incredibly exciting to be able to share this with you guys. Like, this has been in the works for so long.
I'm recording it.
And it's really exciting to be able to share with all the World of Warcraft players in Australia and New Zealand, and I think players right around the world, because everyone has been hearing the cries of the Oceanic players. Trust me, we hear it every day. And so we've been down there in the trenches with you, making this happen, and it's just been a massive project. So there's a few folks at the end of the night I've got to call out and thank as part of that, because it's just involved so many people. And think about Ian coming down right after the pre-patch, right after the pre-expansion patches drop, and this guy's jumped on a plane for 30 hours to come down here and share this excitement with you guys. So I realize this is all really exciting, but I'm going to have to ask everyone to kind of shift gears for the Q&A, because we really got to focus in on Ian and what Ian can really focus in on, as a lead game designer. He's not a server engineer, okay? And something tells me a few people in this room were planning to ask a question about Australian servers. So I take great pride in gazumping you on that opportunity. So you scratch that one off the top of the list and go to your number 2, go to your number 3. So all the information around this is going to be posted on the Oceanic forums. Oops, so I've got one forward. Right after this event. So no one needs to pull their phones out. We're going to have full FAQ. We've got a big alert. We've got a huge release. We've got all the info there. Okay, so you know, we're going to be able to hang out with you guys and chat about that. So just hold on to your excitement for now, because all shall be revealed. But I can tell you this: we're going to be offering everyone wants to transfer their tunes down to Australia free character training. So start thinking about all those rounds that you want to start collecting those tunes from, because it's a set window, but we're going to give you lots of time to do it. And the second piece of information I can tell you, and I think this is really exciting, and this is truly, from my heart, why it's taken this long. Because we have found a way to allow you to continue to play the game with all your guildies and all your friends in North America. Yeah. It's like magic. So just hold on to your excitement. A lot of that information, we've been working on this for so long, so it's so exciting to share that. But I wanted to give you those two little pieces of info so no one's going to get on their phone and try and hunt for this stuff on the forums. This is not going up until the event's over. Okay, deep breath. So now we're going to do the Q&A. So I'm going to hand the mic over to Dave Chiappini, the Blizzard ANZ PR manager, and Ian's going to come back up on stage. We've got a couple people with mics. Marie Peters, our marketing manager on one side, and PJ Russell, our esports and community manager. So get your hands up. There's a lot of people in the room. We're going to kind of, get the lights up a little bit, just on the side, so no one trips and falls down the stairs. But be as patient as you can, and over to you.
All right, thanks very much. Now, Ian, obviously, we want to try and keep it on the gameplay experience. And guys, we know you have lots of questions about the service, and we will be answering them all. So stay in your seats, stick your hand up. We've got about 15 minutes to go through questions, so try and keep them short, and we'll answer as many as we can. So we've got Marie on the left-hand side and PJ on the right, or possibly next.
Been a big fan of Blizzard for so long. Just wondering, is Blizzard going to bring back 40-man raids? Because as much as we love the 30-man scaled raids, we're finding about a bit of people not being able to raid with us because we have more than 30 people.
Sure. On November 21st, there's a 40-player Molten Core. It's coming back, right? That counts. Now, I think realistically, 30 is as high as we're looking to go right now. And having been someone who participated in 40-player raiding back in the day, kind of run a 40-player raid group, the logistics that go into it are pretty terrifying. And I think past a certain raid size, and I think as you get close to 40, you start to hit those thresholds, you lose a lot of the individual responsibility and the individuality that makes raiding in that kind of group is interesting. People start to feel much more like cogs in a machine than having any particular designated role. And I think really we went up to 30 to give support to the existing social structures that are built around 25-player guilds. We know a typical 25-player guild probably has a roster, in the ballpark of 30 people. We want to make sure they can all be included. Never going to rule anything out completely going forward, but it's not really in the cards in terms of a plan for the immediate future.
All right. We've got some questions at the front as well.
Hi, Brendan. Good evening. How are you doing? First off, thank you for the use of the Aussie service. Believe you me, although it's been waiting, it's been a long time, and welcome to Australia. Woo! Secondly, we have had to deal with, and I know you guys have your limitations, with American business hours, American tickets, American wait times. I would like to offer the suggestion, it's not a question. If anybody in this room, if you were to ask how many people would like to come and work for Blizzard in Australia, how many hands do you think you'd see? So isn't it about time we not only had Australian service, we had an Australian customer service office staffed by Australian customer service staff, cutting your tickets time down, cutting your technical time down, dealing in our business hours. You're looking forward to the next 10 years? I want to be playing well in the next 10 years. But as an Australian and as an equal part of the Blizzard team from the very beginning to today.
Yeah, I mean, that's obviously not something that's within my power to grant, but
because, seriously, when you think about it, less time for tickets, less time for everything. Thanks.
Sure thing. Yeah, I completely understand where you're coming from, completely understand and appreciate the passion, and there's nothing wrong with the words that you said. But that said, I'm but a mere game designer, cannot wave my magic wand and make customer service offices appear. I think one thing that's worth addressing a little bit in terms of maintenance times, we understand those are inconvenient. I think that's a double-edged sword to an extent. in that the inconvenient maintenance times is the price you pay for having access to the larger pool of North American matchmaking for things like Raid Finder, faster queue times, being part of that larger pool. And it's necessary that the maintenance times, weekly raid resets, and so forth be aligned. So that is the one part that is a design call. The rest is completely valid feedback.
Next question.
Hi, Ian. A couple of questions. Well, actually, no, just one. How many Oceanic servers are we looking at here, and do they have sick names, and can you tell us what they are?
Oh, I can tell you exactly what they are. The 12 Oceanic servers right now. If you have those servers, then they'll go down for maintenance.
Crimson Scales on Kalestra's, mate.
You will log to Frostborn or what have you, and your ping will be 1/10 of what it used to be. Maybe not that exact number, but in that ballpark.
What status it is? That's
What's your opinion on Appear Offline mode? Because you guys promised, like, I think a few years ago to make it, happen, but it still hasn't happened yet. Like, for example, sometimes I won't play alone, without my guildies or my friends, when I'm always online and I have to say no or something like that,
Yeah, I think that's sort of a BattleNet level aspect of the social features. I think that, I think one of the design concerns with the appear offline option or an invisible option is that a lot of people tend to just move to that as their default a lot of the time, because it feels like, I can see who's online, but they can't see me. And then you end up in a world in which we get concerned about, where that becomes a default mode of operation. You have like 10 people who are all online, but no one can see each other, and they all think no one else is online to group with, and they don't group, and otherwise they could really be getting together and having fun. That said, completely understand the concerns, completely understand both the privacy angle, and sometimes you just want to go play a different game and not be bothered. But nothing specific to announce at this time.
Seeing a lot of hands.
Hey mate, first of all, shout out to Ascension, rank 1 Oceanic, rank 1 Oceanic, all hail Marcy. And my question to you is about mythic progression and Imperator and Blackhand, and how you compare it to a fight like Li Shan or Sharafia.
I think as far in terms of tuning goals, or tuning goals for a fight like Mythic Margok or Mythic Blackhand is in the same ballpark as Heroic Li Shan was, as Siegecraft or Blackfuse, that sort of fight. That's not what Mythic difficulty as a whole is about, but that's because a raid zone has a progression, right? So I think certainly Boss 1, Mythic Kargath, not supposed to be this guild-breaking destroyer of souls. But when we start talking about the end boss of an entire patch or an entire raid on Mythic, that's kind of our tuning target. It's supposed to be a fight that will be challenging to the best guilds in the world, and that others will eventually be able to overcome as they get better gear and more practice.
PJ.
Hi, if Chinglish is here, can he stand up?
Chinglish!
How can you miss that guy?
Hi, I really liked the pendulum analogy, it was really good. I think with the pruning, what was the kind of basis behind doing that for some of the classes? Because for some of them you took away like iconic things, like for priests, for example, they don't have renew anymore if they're disciplined, for example. So yeah, just wondering what was
I think there's no one-size-fits-all answer to that. I think in some cases we took away things because they were redundant. In other cases we took away things because they were completely unused. In other cases, such as Renew for Priests, that was more about trying to differentiate holy and discipline a bit more from each other. I heard someone ask about Scattershot over here for Hunters, and that was more about overall CC disarmament. We wanted to reduce the overall amount of CC in the game. So even though there were some core buttons that were a part of what your class's toolkit has been for a long time, the net goal there was to get to a place where you don't go into a battleground and spend 15 seconds consecutively going from fear to stun to sap to poly to another fear to another stun, because everyone has 5 different crowd control buttons. So there wasn't just a one-size-fits-all approach, but the outcome obviously was just fewer buttons.
Do we have questions on the front here?
Thanks again for coming, but I'm going to ask about the future. I was going to ask about garrisons because I was going to ask, is it going to be something that's going to be becoming something more permanent, unlike the farms we had in Pandaria, which I can almost guarantee none of us are going to use again? Is garrisons going to be just a money sink that we'll use during Draenor and never again, or are you looking to keep that going on for the foreseeable future?
Well, I mean, I think so. The garrison is very much tied to Draenor. I mean, in its current form, it's physically located there. Wherever later expansions happen to take you, I think that your garrison isn't going to magically come along with you. But as with all features, we're going to be watching closely. And things that we will learn, things that are most popular, most well adopted, are elements that we're going to take and bring forth, or are likely to do so with regard to the gameplay. But I mean, ultimately, the story of the garrison is about building this base in Draenor. You're building an army of followers to be collected from venturing around Draenor, and that's where that will remain. But it's not going to go away in the future. We'll always have to go back and collect resources there, collect things that continue to send followers on missions and so forth.
All right, next question.
Hi, I'm just wondering about what your personal opinion of WildStar in terms of core mechanics and encounters that they might be doing particularly well.
Yeah, I think so. Definitely, I honestly, I have to confess, normally I try to play like every MMO that comes out. I haven't had as much time to sink into WildStar just because I'm so busy with Warlords personally. It's hard for me to really dig into super in-depth commentary of a game I haven't played more than casually. I mean, certainly I've watched a lot of streams, watched a lot of videos, and there's a lot of cool stuff in terms of the overall action-oriented combat. And a lot of cool encounters that do some of the environmental integration that we also like, and I think is particularly successful. Like I forget the name of the boss, but the first one that knocks the floor out from under you, various hex patterns, where you're actually using the shape of the floor to define your play space. It's something that we're possible we want to also try to integrate the environment into the fights and make the room a part of the encounter as well.
Great. Next question, please.
Two small questions. One, a bit of state rivalry. Which state is the service going to be located in? And two, with the Blood Elf character models, are we going to be waiting until the next patch for them, or are they going to be released kind of on the lowdown in mid-patch?
I don't have information with regard to the first question.
Blood Elf models, releasing a really comprehensive FAQ. It'll answer everything you want to know. But if you still have questions, we're always listening.
Blood Elf models, I think, are likely to come in the next content patch. We're going to get them as soon as we possibly can. And I think the plan there always was to do all the classic races, like all the original 2004 races, 460, then do Blood Elf and Draenor, then move on to Worgen and Goblin after that. We kind of bumped Draenor up a little bit in the pecking order just because they're so present everywhere in Draenor, and we were going to use them as NPCs all over the place, so we just kind of pushed extra hard to get them in first. Sorry, Blood Elves, but as soon as possible.
Right, I think we've got time for a few more. So, go for it.
Hi Ian, thanks for coming down under. I was just wondering if Blizzard came to you tomorrow and said you could design any game you wanted to design, what would you choose to design if you had a blank slate?
Sorry, can you repeat the question?
Yeah, sorry, I was just saying if Blizzard came to you tomorrow and said you're allowed to design whatever game you want to, you had a blank slate, blank check, which one would you go for? What style of game?
That's a good question.
He doesn't want to answer it.
I honestly don't know what I would say about it. I'd have to think long and hard. I just try to make something off the top of my head. At least at Blizzard, it's interesting. I've spent so much of my time, so much of my energy just focusing on World of Warcraft. I haven't really had time to sit back and think okay, what would I want to do next? What's the next big project for me? Because I see myself working on WoW for a really long time to come. But that's a good question.
Next question.
When designing an encounter, do you do it from a top-down or bottom-up in terms of the difficulty levels? So, say for example, Wei Shin, when you would design it, would you design the then heroic, now mythic version and then downscale it? Or do you do it the other direction or somewhere in the middle? How do you go about designing an encounter?
It varies. I would say it's about 50% of the time one, 50% of the time the other. Sometimes we will design out a cohesive encounter and look at it on paper, play test it some, and realize, wow, there's way too much going on here. Darumu is an example of that. Darumu's mythic, the heroic Darumu was the original paper design for Darumu, period. And it was, wow, okay, there's way too many abilities here. Let's pull the parasites, let's pull this other thing. Okay, that'll be normal now. Other times, we have a self-contained encounter, and then think about, okay, what are we going to add? On Lei Shen, that was certainly the case, for example. Like that fight was designed for normal, then we added the twist of, okay, well, what happens if instead of shutting off when you overload a conduit, it stays permanently powered? What does that do to the fight?
Great, I think we have one down the front here.
Thank you for coming out.
Pleasure.
I've been playing the game for a long time now. You guys got me through a lot of stuff. And I guess my question's kind of about characters in general. I missed out on some things like, say, warlocks, like having to go out and make get their pets and actually like making that bond with like demons and stuff like that. Are we going to see things like that actually come back? I mean, giving hunters pets or giving warlocks demons, although it makes it easier for the everyday player, is there going to be a way to incorporate that into World of Warcraft again? And I mean, for not just those sort of classes, but familiars and stuff with all classes and even mounts, like racial specific mounts, like the Blood Knight charger was removed, the ability to get him. Just things like that. Is there going to be any way to incorporate those little things back into the game that made these quest lines really unique?
I don't know if we have a great answer for that, but I completely agree with you. I understand. I think the reason why those things were discarded or baked in was that they reflected a very different era of the game in terms of pacing. Right? When leveling is so much slower, it was completely reasonable that, okay, because it takes 6 hours to get each level, when you hit level 20, you have to go on this crazy spirit quest to go get your water totem, and that's how you now have a water totem. And then you can go back to leveling, and that was a reasonable detour. Suddenly, when leveling takes 30-40 minutes, asking you to travel around the world for an hour and a half to unlock an ability just led to most people completely ignoring that ability. And so you had tons of, higher-level shamans walking around who didn't have their totems lit, or warlocks who didn't have pets unlocked, because didn't feel like it was worth the time. It wasn't as clear how that fit in. That said, there's a tremendous special flavor to going and doing this custom class quest. Whether it's learning rogue poisons, whether it's getting your totems, whether it's learning how to summon a new demon. And so I think we'd definitely like to add that type of gameplay in a way that fits in better with the pacing. I don't know that we're going to bring back the lower versions, but certainly going forward, keeping an eye out for ways to do it for specific classes where it makes sense. I think something like the Warlock Green Fire quest worked out pretty well. It was pretty cool. We'd love to be able to do that for other classes.
Hi Ian, welcome to Australia. I've been having a blast in the dungeon content in the beta, and I'm just wondering if you have plans to keep the content and the rewards relevant as we travel through the expansion to get geared up.
Sorry, I missed the middle part.
Bring the mic a little closer.
Yeah.
Sorry, do you have plans to keep the content and the challenge relevant as we gear up through the expansion of your dungeons in beta?
So I think, yes. I think there's some possibilities there. I think that, content and challenge-wise, I think challenge modes, as far as dungeons go, we're trying to position in a little bit of a different place than we did in this kind of area. In Mists, challenge mode dungeons were like purely for cosmetic benefits and prestige. There's no other reason to run them whatsoever. Whereas now, actually, before the raids open, doing a challenge mode is going to be probably your potential best in slot gear for those few weeks. And that level of difficulty is something that's going to remain relatively constant. So I think we can certainly use that as a hook potentially. Going forward, again, we don't have specific plans, but we've certainly talked about and explored whether we could do a mythic version of Dungeons, let's say, that has a higher item level requirement, higher challenge, higher gear reward, so that when you're doing the dungeons, a year from now, at higher item level gear, you're not just stopping the whole thing, AoEing it all down, and it feels irrelevant.
Next question.
Hi, thanks for coming down, guys. I just noticed throughout the last couple of expansions that the value added on professions are copping a bit of a hit. Like inscription, you don't have to learn them anymore once you learn one. Cooking, there's the guild, the cauldrons for the flasks, and the cooking is an unintentional hit to
to making golden well, or?
No, I think we're trying to strike. I mean, I think
No one makes money out of engineering.
a balance with regard to professions and how they fit in. I mean, to talk about the specific examples you mentioned, inscription. I mean, scribes can still make a tremendous number of glyphs, and scribes were making a fortune to start every new expansion, selling document decks like they always do. But part of the concern there was for a leveling player, for someone who just unlocks inscription, who unlocked glyph slots for the first time, there really wasn't much you could do to interact with the system, and it was in fact kind of confusing. And if you actually went to the auction house and tried to buy your glyphs, if you knew enough to do that, they were probably exorbitantly priced by someone who's, controlling the whole market, trying to sell glyphs to max level players, and the poor level 25 newbie has no idea what to do. So we baked in some of the sort of core leveling glyphs, the things that really are meant to ease your leveling experience, just so you can engage with that part of the system. With regard to other things, I mean, cauldrons we removed from guilds because we did feel actually that they diminished the role and importance of the alchemist too much. We recently announced that we're retuning the power of cooking in Draenor with respect to the barn building, so that cooks will again be able to make food that is equal to, not inferior to, what the barn can yield. And overall, I think particularly with the garrison system and the ability to build profession buildings, there are more ways than ever to interact with your profession and to engage in the economy and to make lots of gold if that's what you're looking to do. But with the removal of the passive stat bonuses from professions, that actually focuses the profession space on gold making, on economic power. People who have no interest in really being a leather worker can ignore it, rather than just spending that one day buying a bunch of stacks of leather off the auction house, skilling up so you can unlock your stat perk, and never touching it again.
We know you guys have a lot of questions. We've got time for 2 more, but the whole team's going to be hanging around right after the Q&A, so feel free to come up and have a chat as well.
Awesome, thanks. No, we're going to have to cap it now, guys. We're running so over that we have something really special to share with you at the end, and if we don't cut it off now, we won't be able to share it with you. So,
Look, dance.
Dance contest? Okay, guys, it's been a phenomenal night. Like, we're just so incredibly excited to have been here to share it with you. Like the guy said, we've got this beautiful foyer space downstairs. A lot of people wanted to get photos of the portal when they came in, so make sure you grab a snap on your way back out. It's going to come down probably in about 45 minutes, so I'd really like you guys to go down and get some good shots before we have to start bumping out. So in closing, first up, man, I gotta thank this guy. All the way to Sydney, 30 hours on a plane, round trip, in probably the busiest time of the year for the World of Warcraft team. So we're so incredibly excited that not only was Ian able to come down, but his boss let him come down. So. Next person I really want to thank is the gentleman next to me. His name's Michael Fong. Michael is responsible for Blizzard for right across Asia Pacific, from China all the way down to us, and this man was instrumental in getting these servers across the line. So. Next, I'd really like to thank what we call Blizzard ANZ. And for the record, this is it. Guys, we're a tiny team, but we're incredibly passionate about Blizzard, we're incredibly passionate about our games, and we're incredibly passionate about you guys, our fans.
And we love you!
Thank you. That really means a lot. It really does. And finally, I really want to thank you guys in particular for getting onto Eventbrite and getting these tickets done in 3 minutes. Okay? This is something that I'm sure Ian's back to HQ and say, hey, maybe we should do something bigger in Australia. We are continuously humbled by the outpouring of love and adoration from our fans, and we hear it and we see it, and we're on the forums every day, we're in social media every day, and it's just, it's so important for us to find these opportunities to hang out with you guys face to face. So thank you guys for coming down. It means a lot. There's one last special little thing we're going to show you at the end, so everyone stay in their seats. Once that's done, meet us down in the lobby. We'll have a hangout. We only have about 30 minutes in the lobby, but get lots of snaps. We printed out all that big, beautiful art so you guys can get some really great pictures. And you know, again, we talk about the size of getting these files down, but just getting those cinematic stills were just enormous. And what we're about to show you at the end took even longer to download than the vanilla cinematic at the beginning. So guys, we're going to see you all on the Oceanic front lines 2 weeks from tonight.
Next week's the maintenance that will be later extended.
Never know. I know what this is.
Not our destiny. Times change.